Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, 3 Topics Gamer here to share with you another one of my requested top 10 list videos to share with you guys today. Now, I did a top 10 list video, I believe last week or the week before, sharing my top 10 favorite Capcom games. But as requested by one of my awesome viewers going by the name of Sean the Deer Man, he wants to know what are my top 10 favorite Konami published games. So that's what we're going to do for this video. Now, if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep track of me in all my future videos. And remember, if you guys have any ideas for future tier list rankings or top list videos or discussion videos, just any type of videos or reviews in general, make sure you let me know in the comments down below, and I will try to get them up as soon as I can, as well as to make sure to give you an awesome shout out at the very beginning. So, starting off with number 10 on my list is a game that it may seem unfair to put it in this position because I know if certain things had happened, it would be significantly higher. I would even say it would be number 5 on my list. And that game has to go to Castlevania Lords of Shadows. Now, the reason it's number 10 is simply due to one sad fact. And that is the fact that I unfortunately have yet to actually play this game. But I do know that it kind of fits into the same mold of like classic God of War and Dante's Inferno, and that type of game is something I absolutely would have loved to have played. I'm still trying to find a copy of it now. Maybe I'll get one on eBay, or maybe I'll pick up a copy if I find one at a retro store, but I know for a fact that if I had played this game, I probably would have given this at minimum an 8, maybe an 8.5. I have done research on this video for a character for a prior Versus Series matchup, and I have seen about 30 minutes of gameplay, so I know absolutely this would be one of the greatest Konami games, if not be my favorite Castlevania game of all time. But I simply cannot give it that privilege because I haven't yet to play it. But I do know it would be about number 5 on a list like this. But sadly, because I still haven't played it, it has to take the number 10 spot on this list. Taking the number 9 spot on my list is going to go to another Castlevania game, and this one is going to have to go to Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, this came out on PlayStation, and a lot of people kind of consider this the beginning of the Metroidvania period, because this is the first game, gameplay-wise, where it kind of added RPG elements, and kind of how you go through the game is very similar to something like Metroid. Now, the primary game has you take control of Alucard, and apparently you're not only battling Dracula again in his castle, but you're trying to save Richter Belmont, who's somehow been taken under the control of Dracula. And the game is quite extensive. The story is pretty standard in terms of Castlevania qualities. I think the gameplay was perfectly fine. I think the addition of RPG elements is always a major plus because I'm a major RPG fan. And it has a great soundtrack, especially for PlayStation 1. There was like a number of games that were coming out there for Castlevania that were coming out during that period. You have to remember that like Castlevania for PlayStation was for this game, and then on the N64 they had like 2 Castlevania games. I do believe that there was also a Sega Castlevania game that came out around the same time, but I would say out of all the games that came out at that period for Castlevania, this definitely was my favorite. I've actually played this a number of times, and it's just an awesome Castlevania game. If you haven't had a chance to play it, many people will say it's easily one of the greatest Castlevania games, and it's a title that is absolutely well deserving, which is why it's taking the number 9 spot on my list. Taking the number 8 spot on my list is going to have to go to another Castlevania game, and I promise it is the last one on this list, and that is going to have to go to Super Castlevania 4 for the Super NES. Now, I do believe that this is easily one of my all-time favorite Super NES games of all time. I believe it's either number 4 or number 5. It's pretty high up there. But this is easily one of the greatest platformers of all time, especially for the 16-bit era. It very much follows the standard traditional style of the classic Castlevania games that came out on the NES, but it's just, everything's just amped up. Gameplay, combat, graphics, controls, boss fights, everything you could ever ask for. It, like, the idea that it's called Super Castlevania is a title that it's absolutely well worthy, and easily, to me, has always remained the greatest Castlevania game of all time. However, I think that had I played Lord of Shadows again, that probably would have lost the title. But as it stands right now, it still holds that title, which is why it's going to take the number 8 spot on my list. Taking number 7 spot is a game that is a bit unusual, but it was really, really popular in its day, and a game that I still play to this day, and that is in the form of DDR Max 2. I am a massive DDR fan. I was playing this non-stop in the early 2000s and then 2010s. I still have my dance pad that I would use for my PlayStation 2, and I actually took my PlayStation 2 and dance pads to high school to challenge a couple of other students and my teacher during like one random free day that we had. And I asked my teacher ahead of time, and he said it was okay. So it was easily one of my favorite high school memories. But DDR. I love dance simulator games. I love games like this. I'm even into games like Guitar Hero, but easily Dance Dance Revolution is still my favorite. And this one by far has my favorite soundtrack. I know that a number of DDRs have still come out. I don't think they make them for the consoles, but I still think they make them for the arcades. But this is just the one that I've easily spent the most time playing. I would easily challenge any of you to a game of DDR, and I will probably whoop you and school you. And I might even teach a couple of dancing lessons in the process. Now, I know there's just a couple other dancing simulator games, but this one has always been the closest and nearest to my heart, which is why it's taking the number 7, the lucky number 7 spot on my list. All right, now that we're on to the number 6 spot, we are now jumping into the favorite franchise of Yu-Gi-Oh! And taking the number 6 spot on my list is going to have to go to Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists of the Roses. This is easily one of the more interesting Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that actually doesn't follow the standard traditional style of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I actually like that. I like that they can take the concept of Yu-Gi-Oh! And apply it in a much different way, and it's still being quite creative, and it actually kind of fits the tone that it's trying to set. This one's pretty interesting. I love the soundtrack. I love the gameplay style that they do. I love the controls. I like that it's 2-player. It does have a few limitations in terms of how you build your decks, but I think the combat system was very, very unique. But yeah, I actually believe I put this, I did like a top 5 favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, and I believe I put this originally as number 3. And I think if I was doing that list now, I would have switched this and number 2. I would have switched their spots. So the game that's number 2 would be 3, and this would be number 2. So yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels of the Roses. Great, all-time favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that's not done in a traditional style, and I think it still holds up to this day, which is why it's number 6 on my list. Well, taking the number 5 spot, we're now officially in the top 5, and it's going to go to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, and it's a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that actually wasn't on my last Yu-Gi-Oh! Top 5 list, and that is going to have to go to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! I believe Master Duel is probably the most popular Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that is currently being played. I think had I played Master Duel at the time I made that last video, that easily would have taken the number 1 spot, because it's visually and just mechanically, it's the best version of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you want to learn how to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's what you want to play. If you want to test out and do all different game modes and all kinds of decks and play by the current rules, and they're currently updating the card setup, that's really what you want to do. In fact, I've spent probably more time, I've put it like this, I know, having checked it, I've easily put over 350 plus hours playing Master Duel. That's how much I play. And the fact that I can play this on not only my PlayStation 5 and my PlayStation 4, but I can also play this on my phone. So like if I'm being pretty bored, I can just kind of pop it up and keep it up. I think it's a major plus. So yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel takes the number 5 spot on my list. All right, now that we're in the top 4, the rest of these games are pure Metal Gear games, as Metal Gear Solid is my favorite video game franchise of all time, so these last 4 games are really the all-time best Metal Gear games that I've ever played. So taking the number 4 spot is going to have to go to the only kind of different and non-traditional Metal Gear game, but one that is still really effing awesome, and that is in the form of Metal Gear Rising. This is a game I was very much against. I did not like the idea of them making a hack and slash Metal Gear game centered around Raiden, taking place after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4, because I thought that the ending of 4 is absolutely perfect in terms of closing off the franchise. So I always kind of viewed this game as kind of a what-if scenario game and not a true canon game. But even in that context, this is a really awesome game. Amazing combat. Raiden is a total badass. Easily one of the top 5 greatest video game soundtracks to any hack and slash game of all time. If you ever get a chance to play this, I assure you it is going to be well worth your time. You're going to have a lot of fun, and you're definitely going to get your blood pumping really cranked up in a good way. So that's why it takes the number 4 spot on my list. Taking the number 3 spot is another Metal Gear game in the form of probably one of the more popular Metal Gear games that I think could actually use a remake, but it's actually already been remade once before, and that is in the form of Metal Gear Solid 1. Now, in some cases, you could also include Twin Snakes, because it's very, very similar. It's just, I would think, cinematically, it's a little bit more flashy, but, you can never beat the original Metal Gear game. This is the Metal Gear game that a lot of people were first introduced. They didn't play the original 2 or technically like original 3 like NES Metal Gear games, so this is the one that introduced them to the franchise, and it very much did that for me. This is easily one of the all-time greatest PlayStation 1 games of all time. This is easily one of Hideo Kojima's greatest masterpieces. A lot of people go back and revisit this game. It easily has one of the best set of casts. It has amazing voice acting at a period of time where there really wasn't a lot of voice acting in the game industry at the time. And it just has a truly incredible story that I think even after over 20 years still holds up. And heck, I easily try to replay this as much as I can whenever I have enough free time. So yeah, easy. Metal Gear Solid 1. Number 3 best Konami game of all time in my opinion. And heck, well worthy for the number 3 spot on my list. Alright, now these last two are truly elite. Because not only are they in my legendary 10 out of 10 club, they are actually in the peak of that particular club. As these spots on my all-time 10 out of 10 club list, they take up spots number 1 and number 3. So, not only is it may be number 2 on this list, but this is my third favorite video game of all time in the form of Metal Gear Solid 4. The conclusion, in my opinion, to the Metal Gear Solid franchise, or at least the primary story. Now, the interesting thing about this particular box is this is actually the very, very first PlayStation 3 game I ever purchased, and I actually purchased this when I was still in high school before I had a PlayStation 3. So that's how much I knew I love it. And heck, even to this day, this is by far my all-time favorite PlayStation 3 game of all time. And the PlayStation 3, even to this day, even by today's standards, is still my favorite generation of PlayStation. So, the story. Conclusion. Solid Snake is taking on Liquid Ocelot, who is trying to destroy the world by using a bunch of computer programs in order to kind of take over the overall computer systems that are pretty much running the entire war economy. There's a number of key moments, a lot of exposition. It answers every single question that had been asked over the course of the franchise, and I believe if you actually take the time period of the story, that expands well over 60 years and 7 games. Unfortunately, Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain ruined it, but I don't like to acknowledge this being really part of the franchise. But this easily is one of my all-time favorite conclusions to my all-time favorite franchise. It's a masterpiece of a game. It's a 10 out of 10, my third favorite video game of all time, but taking the number 2 spot on this Konami list. So let's go on to what is number 1. Well, I've been saying it all the time. I mean, heck, you can even see it in the background in a double set. Number 1, my number 1 favorite Konami video game of all time, which is also my number 1 favorite video game of all time, and will probably stay that way for the rest of my life, in the form of Metal Gear Solid 3. This is the GOAT. Greatest video game of all time that I've ever played. Unfortunately, they're remaking it. I don't think I'm going to try the remake because this game is perfect as it is. This tells the story at the very beginning of the Metal Gear Solid storyline. You take control of Solid Snake's genetic father in the form of Big Boss, going by the codename Naked Snake, and he is going to be sent into Russia in order to take out the legendary Cobra units, including his master, the Boss, and stop the Shagohod, and stop, hopefully, another world's war from starting. Story is incredible. This tops every other Metal Gear ever made in every single department. I like the gameplay. Visuals, sure, they look a little bit outdated, but I think it gives it a certain flair. Love the story. Love the soundtrack. Love the characters. Has my favorite cast of characters in any Metal Gear game. And what more can I say about my all-time favorite video game of all time? I mean, I can make a whole video as for 10 reasons why it's the best, but heck, I don't got that kind of time because heck, we got to get this list going. And actually, we're at the end of the list. So yeah, Metal Gear Solid 3, number 1 favorite Konami game of all time. So, now that you guys know my top 10 Konami published video games of all time, I would love to know what are some of your favorite Konami games of all time. Let me know in the comments down below, and like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you guys next time.